Car crashes happen every day, but some are so shocking, so disturbing, that they stick in people's minds forever. We're talking about high-speed disasters, tragic deaths, and freak accidents that left the world in disbelief. Some of these crashes were caught on camera, others were surrounded by mystery, and all of them ended in tragedy. So, if you think you've seen it all, think again, because these are the most disturbing car crash deaths of all time. It was a quiet evening in November 2024, the kind where the hum of passing cars blends into the background, where the road feels predictable, safe. But on the RM12 motorway in La Manga, Spain, the ordinary was about to shatter in the most horrifying way. A group of British men, likely looking forward to a relaxing trip, never saw it coming. A speeding vehicle, towing something massive, rushed down the highway. The cargo? A 32-foot speedboat, one of the infamous narco lanchas often used in smuggling, built for one thing: speed. With its powerful twin 300-horsepower engines, it was a machine meant to cut through ocean waves undetected. But that night, it became something far deadlier. Without warning, the boat broke free. It didn't just slip off, it launched. At a staggering speed of 120 kilometers per hour, the massive vessel turned into a flying battering ram, slicing through the air before coming down with devastating force, right on top of a Seat Leon. Inside were 3 British men. The driver and front seat passenger, aged 49 and 57, never stood a chance. The impact was immediate, brutal. Their lives were gone in an instant. The third man, 54 years old, sat in the back. He survived, but just barely. Critical injuries left him fighting for his life as emergency responders worked desperately to save him. But the destruction didn't stop there. The sheer force of the crash set off a chain reaction. The motorway became a scene of chaos. 6 more vehicles caught in the mayhem, cars skidding off the road, some overturned, others crushed beyond recognition. Twisted metal, shattered glass. A highway turned into a war zone. Rescue teams fought against time, working for over 30 minutes to free those trapped in the wreckage. The injured, including 2 women and 2 men, were rushed to hospitals, their conditions uncertain. Then came the questions and the fear. This wasn't just some freak accident. The boat wasn't an ordinary vessel. It was built for smugglers, designed to outrun police on open water, and the person responsible for towing it, gone, fled the scene before authorities arrived. Was it an accident? Or was it something more sinister? Investigators moved quickly, sifting through the wreckage, searching for answers. Among the twisted debris, they found something: a set of supermarket receipts. A small clue, but perhaps enough. Authorities pulled security footage from nearby stores, hoping to identify the driver, to track down whoever had let this deadly machine loose. Meanwhile, the victims' identities were confirmed. British nationals, their car packed with golf clubs, likely on their way to the famed La Manga Golf and Tennis Resort. A trip that should have been nothing more than a relaxing getaway had ended in unthinkable tragedy. Photos from the scene showed the horrifying aftermath. The speedboat still lying across the motorway, wreckage all around it. The damage told the story. A massive projectile, a moment of chaos, lives stolen in an instant. And yet, the biggest mystery remained. Where was the driver? The boat itself offered no answers. A Zodiac inflatable, no visible registration numbers, its origins unclear. Was it being transported for innocent reasons? Or had it been part of something much larger, something criminal? Officials, now working with the British Embassy, dug deeper, looking for any trace of where it had come from and how this disaster had been set in motion. Beyond the loss of life, the crash sent shockwaves through the region. The RM12, a major road connecting La Manga and Cartagena, was shut down for hours. Traffic backed up for miles. People who had planned nothing more than a quiet evening found themselves trapped in the aftermath of a nightmare. And still, the questions remain. How could something this large, this dangerous, have been so poorly secured? Was this truly a case of negligence, or was there more to the story? And most hauntingly of all, what happened to the person who left this devastation behind? The search for answers continues, But for the families left grieving, no answer will ever be enough. One moment of recklessness, or something far worse, turned an ordinary night into a catastrophe. And for those who survived, the memory of that night will never fade. December 15th, 1995. A cold, quiet evening near Castellandinas, a historic hill fort close to Newquay, Cornwall. But at 6:30 p.m., everything changed. Mark Wade, a 31-year-old truck driver from Fren, had been behind the wheel since early morning. Exhaustion clung to him like a heavy weight as he made his way back to his company's depot in St. Column. His cargo? A Caterpillar digger, strapped onto a low-loader lorry. A routine haul, a job he had done before. But what he didn't know was that a single mistake had already sealed the fate of 5 innocent people. The digger's arm, a massive hunk of steel meant to be locked in place, wasn't secured properly. Maybe he thought it was stable. Maybe he was too tired to double-check. Either way, it was a ticking time bomb, waiting for the right moment to strike. As Wade navigated the narrow B road, the unfastened arm began to swing, silent, deadly, unnoticed. And then, in an instant, it veered into the opposite lane. 4 cars were approaching. There was no time to react. The digger's arm tore through the cars like a blade through paper. Glass exploded into the air. Screeching tires, shattered bodies. 5 lives were lost in an instant. The survivors were left with horrific injuries, their lives forever altered. Emergency services rushed in. 10 ambulance crews, firefighters, police officers. They fought through the wreckage, searching for any signs of life, pulling bodies from mangled vehicles, trying to make sense of the destruction. But for 5 souls, there was nothing anyone could do. As the smoke settled, the investigation began. How had this happened? Why had the digger's arm been loose? The truth was chilling in its simplicity. It should have been locked with a metal pin and chains. The equipment was there. The instructions were clear. But Wade hadn't used them. And what made it worse? He had never been trained properly. His employers, Baseley Plant Hire and Cheptow Plant Hire, had never ensured he knew how to transport heavy machinery safely. Their negligence cost 5 people their lives. The court saw the failure for what it was. The companies were fined £500,000 for disregarding safety. But what about Wade? He wasn't a criminal. He was a man burdened with guilt so crushing it consumed him. The weight of that night never left him. He didn't fight his fate, didn't try to defend himself. When the psychiatric reports came in, the truth was undeniable. He was not the same man who had started that drive. PTSD, depression. The horrors of that night had broken him. The community saw it too. Over 1,000 people signed a petition pleading for mercy, arguing that no prison sentence could be worse than the punishment he was already serving in his mind. The judge agreed. No jail cell could hold him tighter than his own guilt. Instead, Wade was sent to a psychiatric hospital, left to live with the ghosts of that December night. For the victims' families, justice was a hollow word. Their loved ones weren't coming back. The pain, the grief, the questions, none of it would ever fade. But they weren't the only ones who suffered. Richard Bobk, a firefighter from St. Column Major Fire Station, had been one of the first on the scene. He had seen the wreckage, the bodies, the devastation, and it changed him. Richard was a father, a man who loved his daughters, Selena and Anna, more than anything, but the trauma dug into him, deeper and deeper, until he couldn't escape it. No one talked about PTSD back then. No one saw the silent wounds it left. 8 months later, the weight of it all became too much. Richard was gone. His daughters were left with nothing but memories and unanswered questions. Selena later spoke about how her father's loss reshaped their lives, how the years they should have had together were stolen by something no one could see. Years later, his name was finally honored. A plaque at St. Column's Fire Station, a place on the National Fire Brigade Memorial in London. His fellow firefighters gathered to remember him, not just for the tragedy he endured, but for the man he had been before that night. On June 11, 2023, a terrible accident struck the Hunter Valley region of New South Wales, Australia. What began as a joyful wedding celebration ended in an unimaginable tragedy. The night was filled with laughter and dancing as guests gathered at Wandon Valley Estate to celebrate the wedding of Mitchell Gaffney and Malene Edsel. 35 people climbed aboard the bus, their hearts still full from the night's celebrations. The vehicle, a 2009 Volvo B7R operated by Link Bus Lines, rumbled to life, its headlights cutting through the thick night air. Among the passengers were couples, friends, and members of the Singleton Roosters Australian Rules Football Club, people who had their entire futures ahead of them. But at 11:30 p.m., as the bus neared a roundabout at the M15 Wine Country Drive interchange near Greta, the night took a horrifying turn. Thick fog obstructed the vision, but the driver, 58-year-old Brett Button, pressed on. Then, in an instant, he lost control. The vehicle tipped violently, rolling onto its side with a sickening crash. The devastation was unimaginable. 10 people never made it out alive. Among them were 22-year-old Kea McBride and her mother, 52-year-old Nadine McBride. Kane Simons, just 21 years old, was gone. Zachary Bray, 29th Angus Craig, Tori Coburn, Rebecca Mullen, names that would later be etched into headlines, into the hearts of their loved ones. Darcy Bowman, Andrew and Lynn Scott, all in their 30s, their futures stolen in an instant. Survivors stumbled from the wreckage, some barely able to stand, others too injured to move. 25 people suffered agonizing wounds, and one critically injured passenger was airlifted to Sydney in a desperate bid to save their life. News of the crash tore through the country, leaving a nation in mourning. Emergency crews worked through the night, their faces grim as they pulled bodies from the wreckage. The horror of what had happened began to unfold, and authorities scrambled to find answers. Brett Button, the man behind the wheel, was arrested at the scene. Investigators soon discovered a chilling truth. He had taken tramadol, a powerful painkiller, within the last 24 hours. The dosage was dangerously high, far beyond what was safe. His medical history painted an even darker picture. Chronic pain had plagued him since the 1990s, and for decades he had relied on tramadol to function. But the dependency had cost him. In 2022, a doctor had flagged his addiction, and he was removed from a previous job. Yet, somehow, he continued to work as a driver. Somehow, he was still trusted with the lives of others. As the investigation continued, a painful reality became clear. Button had been speeding when he approached that roundabout. The fog was thick, but he didn't slow down. The people on that bus had no idea their fate rested in the hands of a man who should never have been behind the wheel that night. Grief turned into anger. Families shattered by the crash wanted justice, but when Button was initially charged with 10 counts of dangerous driving, causing death, and negligent driving, it felt like too little. Then, in January 2024, the stakes rose. He was charged with manslaughter. The victim's loved ones clung to the hope that true justice would be served, but hope can be cruel. In a later plea deal, the manslaughter charges were dropped. The legal system decided it was not murder, it was negligence. Button pleaded guilty to dangerous driving causing death and related offenses, but the outrage remained. By September 2024, the verdict was in. Brett Button was sentenced to 32 years in prison, with no chance of parole for 24 years. For some, it was a relief. For others, it wasn't enough. The decision to drop the manslaughter charges felt like an insult to the lives taken. The weight of the tragedy was immeasurable, and no sentence could bring back the loved ones who had been stolen that night. In the aftermath, a wave of support poured in. The Hunter Valley Bus Tragedy Fund, managed by Rotary, raised nearly $1.5 million to help the victims' families. Strangers from across Australia donated, their hearts breaking for those left behind. It was February 13, 2024, in Mesa, Arizona. Ray Longy, a 67-year-old father, grandfather, and devoted aviation enthusiast, was on his way to Phoenix Sky Harbor Airport to pick up his wife. Ray had always loved planes. so much so that his family joked he could recognize an aircraft just by the sound of its engine. Living near Falcon Field Airport, he spent years watching planes take off and land, fascinated by the miracle of flight. But on this night, Ray would never make it to the airport. As he cruised down Greenfield Road in his red Lexus, a private jet began its takeoff just a short distance away. The sleek business aircraft roared down the runway, its engines screaming in the night. Then, something went terribly wrong. The plane struggled, failing to lift off. It veered off course, hurtling toward the road, toward Ray. The impact was devastating. In an instant, the jet slammed into his car, crumpling the vehicle like paper. Flames erupted. The jet skidded wildly, finally coming to a stop in a nearby orchard, engulfed in fire. Inside were 4 passengers: Drew Kimball, his 12-year-old son Grom, Spencer Lindell, and Rustin Randall. None of them survived. A teenage passenger managed to escape, but suffered severe burns. The shock spread like wildfire. Witnesses described the horrifying scene. The plane never even left the ground before it turned into a deadly missile. And Ray, he had been just blocks from his home, just minutes from safety. His daughter, Lorraine, couldn't believe it. "When I heard there was an accident, I assumed it was a car crash," she said. "When I found out a plane was involved, I couldn't believe it. My dad lived next to that airport for years. How could this happen?" Ray wasn't just a man who loved planes. He was a husband, a father, a grandfather. He spent his days with his wife, his children, and his 1-year-old grandson, Charles. He was the kind of man who never missed a chance to check in on his loved ones. Minutes before the crash, he had sent Lorraine a simple text. "Everything okay?" It was the kind of message he always sent, a small but powerful reminder of his love. Now, it was one of the last things he ever said to her. The grief was unbearable. The man who had spent his life admiring planes had been taken by one. It was cruel, unfair. But Lorraine knew one thing. Her father wouldn't want them to drown in sorrow. "He'd want us to keep going," she whispered. Ray had spent his life helping others. He had supported Sunshine Acres Children's Home, donating during the holidays to bring joy to those in need. Now, his family encouraged others to continue his kindness, to give in his memory. For Ray's family, the answer wouldn't bring him back. But knowing the truth, that was the only way to move forward. On the night of July 18, 1969, off Martha's Vineyard, an event involving Senator Edward "Ted" Kennedy would shake the nation, changing his career and his life forever. At just 37, Kennedy was a rising political star, the youngest of the Kennedy brothers, with a powerful legacy to uphold. His brothers, President John F. Kennedy and Senator Robert F. Kennedy, had both tragically been assassinated, and Ted was seen as a key figure in the Senate, even a potential presidential candidate in 1972. But that night would alter his path. After participating in a boat race near the island, Kennedy attended a party with friends and political figures, including Mary Jo Kopechne, a 28-year-old secretary with a promising future. Around 11 p.m., Kennedy left the party with Mary Jo, claiming he was giving her a ride back to her hotel. However, she had left her handbag and room key behind, casting doubt on his explanation. At midnight, Kennedy's car was spotted speeding down an unpaved road near Chappaquiddick. As the car neared a small bridge, Kennedy lost control, and the vehicle plunged into a tidal pond, landing upside down. Kennedy managed to escape, but Mary Jo was trapped inside the submerged car. Instead of immediately seeking help, Kennedy walked back to the party and confided in his cousin and friend, but no one contacted authorities. He then swam to Edgartown, where he changed into dry clothes. The next morning, he was seen calmly walking around the hotel. It wasn't until late morning that he finally reported the incident, by which time the car had been discovered and Mary Jo's body recovered. The delayed response and Kennedy's actions raised questions that have lingered ever since. Why didn't he act immediately? Could Mary Jo have been saved? Why did he wait so long to report the accident? The investigation was brief, and Kennedy's televised statement offered no new clarity. He claimed he was overwhelmed with panic and grief, but many wondered if his primary concern was protecting his political future. speculation swirled. Rumors that Mary Jo might have been pregnant surfaced, but were never substantiated. Some believed she could have survived in an air pocket in the car for hours if help had arrived sooner. Kennedy's friends described him as deeply shaken in the days that followed, with his wife suffering a miscarriage and his father's health worsening from the stress of the scandal. Legally, Kennedy faced little consequence. He pleaded guilty to leaving the scene of an accident and received a 2-month suspended sentence. But politically, the damage was done. The incident forever marred his reputation and dashed any hopes of running for president. While Kennedy would go on to serve in the Senate for decades, respected for his legislative work, the questions surrounding Chappaquiddick remained unanswered. Mary Jo Kopechne's story, overshadowed by the political fallout, ended in mystery. The details of that night, the unanswered questions, the possibility of a different outcome, still haunt those who lived through it. Could it have turned out differently if Kennedy had acted faster? The Chappaquiddick incident remains one of the most debated moments in American political history, leaving behind a legacy of unanswered questions that continue to echo to this day.